Hello there everyone, Mystery here. Talking about the Ogryn update part 2 today, focusing on his arsenal, the changes to some of his weapons, not all of them for some reason, but some of his weapons to, I guess, bring them more in line with where most weapons are at in the game currently. But he has some really big hurdles to overcome that I'll be showing you really quickly. Let me first show you my first big problem with this update or with this change is that three of his like 6 melee weapons are going untouched here. The slab shield and battle maul, the pickaxes, and of course the power maul. So for the first two I can understand that because these weapons are fine, they're his best weapons, but the power maul is dog water. I guess they just didn't even know what to do with it, so they're just leaving it alone until another day. Time will tell, I suppose. But let me go ahead and show you what the biggest issue with the Ogryn's weapons are right here, right now. And this is it right here. So we're going to go ahead and hit this guy in the body. Okay, so he took 324. Let's clean him up. And now we're going to hit him in the head. Remember, he took 324 in the body. 334. Okay, let's check this out on Carapace. Make sure it's not a fluke, right? And in the body, 162. In the head, 167. So he has terrible headshot values, and that's the wrong button to press. And this all comes down to something called the finesse multiplier. And if we pull out the attack we're using here, the profile of the heavy attack, we can see some numbers here. Now I say some numbers and not the numbers that we saw because I would like to take this moment to put my soapbox down and grandstand to you that fuck this table. Fuck this table in particular, because this thing has almost nothing in relation with what you actually see in practice in the Psychanium. I have no idea what's wrong with it or why it won't actually show me what numbers I'm supposed to be seeing, but this annoys the absolute shit out of me, and I have no idea why we have such a ass backwards display of what's supposed to be numbers. And this is only one part of my frustration. My second part of the frustration is that when Fat Shark talks about these numbers and all of the stats and like lingo and jargon that goes into how these weapons work behind the scene, it has the transparency of a fogged up bathhouse cloudy fucking window. Like I can't tell what's going on pretty much at all, and I spent the better part of an hour smashing my head against this table and trying to understand the relationship between it and certain ratios that they're tweaking, and I still don't get it. So fuck. Okay, let's get back to it. So the ratio between critical weak spot here and body shots is the finesse multiplier. That much I do understand, or at least I think I do. So if we look at the critical weak spot hit on a flak armored enemy, it should be doing 301, and if it hit a body shot, it would be doing 241. So we would see here that that's a 25% increase. Now, that's something, right? It's not much, but it's something. However, here's where the fun audience engagement part of the video comes in. I want you, dear viewer, to scroll down and then stop and then hit subscribe and then like the video and then scroll down to the comments. And in the comments, I want you to post what you think the multiplier is for the dueling sword, the Macabian Mark IV dueling sword, you know, the good one. The multiplier here was 1.25 times. What do you think the multiplier is for the Macabian dueling sword? I want you to imagine the Jeopardy music playing right now and go. Okay, pencils down, class. If you guessed it is 2.5 times, you are wrong because it is 3.5 times. In fact, if you get just a weak spot or just a critical hit with the dueling sword on the heavy attack, you will do 2.5 times damage. If you get a critical weak spot hit, you do 3.5x. If we put it a different way, the overall net gain for hitting a critical weak spot on the Ogryn with this weapon, or with most of his weapons, is 25% damage. If you do the same thing on the dueling sword, you gain 250% damage. It is 10 times more powerful to actually be able to aim and attack specific parts of enemies to attack their weak points on any other class than it is on Ogryn. And herein lies a fundamental issue with how the class is designed. He completely disincentivizes not only aiming, but critical hits in general. And this was fine when the game came out because their idea was that the Ogryn, and I disagree with this but it's lore, whatever, was that the Ogryn is too stupid to be able to pick and choose his targets. He wouldn't be out here like sharpshooting, like, oh, I need to nail them in the head. He would be like, I don't know, I'll just hit him in the legs or whatever, right? That, I guess, could make sense. The problem with that being is they built his weapons around that. So they said, okay, well, the weapons don't need to have any finesse multipliers because he's not going to be aiming for heads. He doesn't, that's not his thing. And you can see that reflected in the fact that the Ogryn only has a 2.5% base crit chance when the other classes have 5% and Psyker is 7.5%. And what we've seen over the course of the game's lifespan is that these other classes are running wild with critical chance. They're running wild with finesse multiplier. All the best weapons in the game exploit the fact that hitting headshots just absolutely implodes enemies. It overcomes the damage reduction that armor provides, and it just absolutely destroys stuff. So all the best weapons really exploit headshot multipliers, and the Ogryn's weapons do not do that, with two exceptions that do it to some extent. Guess which ones they are? The two best weapons. The Battle Maul and Slab Shield has a 1.5x multiplier on its attack, so you can see here, this is 150% of that. And same thing with the pickaxe here. It's a 1.5x multiplier. So these two weapons are burgeoning on the edge of being decent because they can actually aim for heads and deal considerable damage that way. But every other weapon falls super far behind because they do measly damage compared to the weapons the other classes have, and they can't benefit from headshot multipliers. Just to point this out one more time, the the heavy attack for the Cleaver here, does like 300. The heavy attack for the dueling sword does like 350. How is that balanced? This is the Ogryn. He's supposed to be strong, and he hits lighter than other people do with a toothpick. Go figure. So anyway, that's the really big problem that Ogryn has, is his finesse ratios and his critical hits suck. You should not be, even in the new Ogryn, you should probably not be building into crit. Like, they offer you Massacre and stuff, and Massacre is getting a buff, but critical hits are going to be really weak on him. And even after some of these changes to the weapons, I still believe they're going to be very weak. Okay, with that being said, let's cut here and we'll hop into talking about the nitty-gritty of these weapon changes. Okay, so now we're at the part that everyone loves, where we scroll through the Fat Shark forums and try to interpret the arcane language that the devs speak about weapon updates. Now, I'm going to do my best to translate this into what one might consider English, because I think whoever wrote this speaks Fat Shark code and not much else, because this is not expressed in a way that your average player, or perhaps any player, could reasonably understand it. And I have spent several hours trying to scour the internet and the forums for any sign of what things like finesse boost mean relative to finesse multiplier, or any explanation of the way that these arcane ratios and stuff work, and it's nowhere to be found. I know that some of the playtesters know this information, and I know the devs must know this information, but have they ever thought to share it with us or make a dev vlog about it? Not that I can find. So yeah, this might just be lost knowledge to the ages if we don't get some resource for it soon. If you do know what this stuff means and I'm talking out of my ass, please let me know down in the comments. Let's first start with translating what they have to say about the Grenadier Gauntlet. Now, this is a weapon that you may or may not have seen. It's pretty crap, so most people don't use it. You'll very rarely see it outside of like playing on Drizzle difficulty. It does very small amounts of damage, and it has like, I think they thought maybe they should nerf its range profile because it can also double as a melee weapon. Ooh, unfortunately it doubles as a really poor melee weapon, and they've made some efforts here to address that issue. What they did is they added finesse multipliers, which means that this thing is going to do double damage when you hit weak spots with it, which is pretty cool, which is with the melee, by the way. They also took the damage and went from 250 at max damage to 350, which is quite a buff. Lets you know how poor a position it was in before, right? Now we get into the more interesting stuff, the range stuff. First of all, it's going to ignore hit zone multipliers for the range grenade, because this thing shoots grenades, right? So what would happen in the current version of the game is like, say for instance, you're shooting at one of the Ragers, the armored Ragers. Well, the armored Ragers count as maniac armor, but they have a carapace chestplate. In the current version of the game, if you hit them squarely in the chest with this grenade, it would say, oh, you hit carapace, you do pretty much no damage. Now, if you hit them in that, it will say, what is the overall type of this enemy? And it would say, okay, since the hit zone multipliers is being ignored, it's just going to take that overall type, which is maniac, into account, and you'll do the full damage. In general, this is a buff to the weapon, because it's going to generally prefer the weakest armor on the enemy. Grenadier Gauntlet also is going to get a longer fuse time for the grenades. What was happening before is like these things do travel very fast, but they only have a 3/4 of a second travel time before they just explode, and so they'd explode in the air if you were trying to cross map stuff. And there's some areas in the game where this is big enough. So they extended the length of that by 1/4 of a second, and that should make it good enough to snipe some really distant targets. They increased the reload speed by 5%, they increased the ammo magazine from 4 to 5, and the most important thing of all, they increased the ammo by 15, from 35 to 50 at the 80% ammo stat. That's very nice, because now think about it like this. You have a 5 magazine, and you have 10 more magazines to go. You have 55 shots, and those 55 shots can all apply the Ogryn's new burning stat when you put explosions near enemies. So there could be some synergy there. That could be pretty cool. They could also benefit from Lucky Bullet and get free shots. So this I could see something going on around this. And then last but not least, the special attack, which is where you take the Grenadier Gauntlet and you punch an enemy in the chest cavity and you shoot a grenade into it, which is one of the coolest ideas conceptually in the game. It's probably the most cool weapon trick that the Ogryn actually has, but it was really kind of shitty. Now what it does is it ignores stagger reduction, and what they're saying there is when enemies are entering into animations, think of the Crusher overhead or the Mauler's ice skating, right? When they're in those animations, they have a innate stagger reduction. It's harder to get them to put their weapon down and go to, like, you know, dazed or laying on the floor. When you hit them with the special punch, now it says, nah, dude, you just got punched by a thing that exploded a grenade in your face. You are staggered, basically. Now, they didn't share the stagger values here, but I'm assuming it's fairly high. It would be amazing if it was high enough to actually stagger bosses, but yeah, time remains to be seen there. Okay, and then the special explosion, you know, from punching actually scales with the size, the blast size stat now. So you could like AoE, like kind of collateral some nearby enemies if you're running through the level and punching enemies with this with explosion. Maybe this guy should be good enough to make a some sort of build round. It remains to be seen. It won't be like actually competitive, but it'll be fun. Cleavers. We just saw Cleavers a second ago. They're not doing super hot. One of the reasons the Cleavers suck in the current meta of the game is because in order to get damage for the Ogryn, you really need to be doing one of two things. You need to be using the pickaxe and just hitting for 1200 damage, because the pickaxe has 1200 damage just raw on its stats. It's just insanely fucking statted. Or you need to be applying batter to enemies and deep frying them. You need to be applying bleed stacks to the talent batter is what I'm saying. And that only happens on heavy attacks. Cleavers do very poorly with heavy attacks because, you know, they just don't have a good profile for it. So these Cleavers fell out of favor because they don't have a good baseline damage. They don't have good raw damage. They have a really poor headshot multiplier, and they can't really heavy attack to apply bleed stacks. So they just are bad for that. Now that bleeds are going to be able to be applied with light attacks, and you'll be able to get the advantages out of heavy hitter with light attacks, we might see a resurgence for Cleavers, but they do need some tweaks to the damage that they do, you know, when you're getting headshots and stuff. So let's see if they give us that here. The first thing they tweaked though is the special on this weapon, which if you're unfamiliar, it's an uppercut. Yeah, that Ogryn, you know, has the cleaver in his left hand or his right hand, and then the left hand comes up and just knocks him under the chin. Now, previously this did a very small amount of damage that was not reduced by armor very much and has a high stagger value. Now it's doing quite a bit of damage, 290 versus the old 70. That's a sizable buff. Now they realized that this is going to be like kind of a lot, so what they did was they modified the amount of damage that this does to enemies down. Now I don't really love this. I feel like you know, you could buff this guy, like I was saying in my video from yesterday, if you didn't catch it, you could buff this guy like crazy, and you're still nowhere near the realm of like dueling sword, the other dumb bullshit the other classes are pulling off. Why do we have to nerf the damage that he's doing on his uppercut? Like, taking it and making it like, oh geez, 290 damage is too much to unyielding enemies. Instead of having to do that, let's have him do 1/5 of that, so he's only doing 60 again. That kind of makes me sad. I know they don't want people just taking the cleaver and walking through level and just uppercutting everything, but it would be funny and it would be cool. And yeah, that kind of does suck. But one thing that I noticed on here is they are actually starting to show you this stat line versus Void Shield. Now, Void Shield, if you're unfamiliar, is the little dome shield that appears around assassination enemies or the captains in Havoc missions. And I think previously they'd never even talked about this being a damage modifier. And it became clear to me that there is a damage modifier for this when I first started using the Crusher, the Zealot Crusher, because that thing's light attacks do as much damage as the Dueling Sword's heavy attacks do to that shield. It must have an insane multiplier, but you can't find that stat anywhere online. I tried. It's just that information is not available. And of course, it doesn't exist in the table in game because that thing is fucking useless. So maybe we could put that in the game. Okay, so yeah, just, you know, that's all for the special attack. Then we get down here to the light attacks themselves. We can see overall we're getting some very sizable buffs to the light attacks here, which I think are definitely deserved because this thing is supposed to be doing some damage on light attacks, but it's doing less damage than, like, you know, knives are. And it's supposed to, you know, it's being wielded by an Ogryn. It should at least be doing like 250 damage. So we got 20% damage boost there. And then we got an increase in multiplier against Maniacs and Carapace, which is very nice. A small finesse boost. This is one of those terminologies I cannot figure out for the life of me what the fuck it means because it's not explained anywhere. There's no lexicon for this shit and no one ever talks about it. But finesse boost, higher is better. So yeah, higher, that's good. We've got more stuff. Okay, down here is where we're gonna talk about the heavy attacks. The heavy attacks get a finesse multiplier that's going from 0.25 to 0.55. So we're bringing it into line with where the pickaxes are. Remember that I showed you the pickaxes and the slab shields. They have a 0.5 finesse multiplier. And what unfortunately you have to take into account is that we don't get to make use of the full finesse multiplier because we are not going to be getting critical headshots on the Ogryn. We're going to be getting headshots, but we really probably can't get crits. And so we're not going to be able to take advantage of the full finesse multiplier. We're not going to be getting 50% extra damage. We're probably going to end up getting more like 30%. Because yeah, that's just, you know, the nature of Ogryn having such poor critical stats. But it is something, and they gave us more finesse boost against all armor types. So like, yeah, they'll be taking more damage from these crits. So yeah, I think this is good. I think we definitely want to see more finesse because these are light attacking weapons. We're going to be swiping at head level. You know, we should be incentivized to hit heads with them. They're like, you know, it's a slicing weapon, right? It should be not chopping through limbs. It should be chopping heads off. Okay, as for all of the cleavers, you know, they talk about some specific stuff down here, but for all of the cleavers, what you should know is that they are making them more easy to dodge with. You're going to get 10% dodge distance and about 11% dodge speed. And then they are making it so that it's a little bit slower to pull that out and wield, but it's snappier to block with. That's about everything here that's going to be super relevant. This is all stuff about the Croak Mark 6 and just some general like chains between attacks, which I don't love to focus on a whole lot. That's not really something I can relate to you in words, but yeah, faster is better, and all of these things here are faster. It's smaller chain times and a more time scale, which speeds up the animations. So good news if you are using a Croak Mark 6. And the Bull Butcher Mark 3, same thing. It's getting a little bit of a nerf to the chain attack time from the push stab, but it's getting a buff to the blocking after that. So it's not really seeing too much change. Now we are on to the shovels. This is something I've been saying about the shovels for a while. I'm glad they finally cottoned on to it, is that these things are clunky. They're very clunky as hell. They do fine damage for the most part. You know, and people were telling me all sorts of stuff like, oh, they one-shot mutants. All you got to do is, bend the little thing and then charge up the attack and then hit the mutant and then they'll die. And that is clunky. The problem with weapons that have activatable abilities in this game is they are clunky. If we want to look at a weapon that is the paragon of unclunkiness, if that's even a word, it's the dueling sword or the dagger. These are weapons that do exactly what you want them to do when you tell them to do it. Do you know how fast the dagger's push stab comes out? Like, it's instantly, right? These weapons are super responsive, and weapons like the latrine shovels are not. So in order to make them more responsive, you need to lower the times between their different attacks and their different animations, and we see a lot of that here. Firstly, they're increasing the cleave and the power distribution on the light attacks, which is good. They're increasing finesse boost to pretty much most of the armor types on the light attacks, which is good because it means you're more incentivized to aim for heads. Same thing with the heavy attacks and for the heavy special when you actually charge the thing and slam it into him. Then we look here for the Brute Brainer Mark III. This thing, as you can see here, all of these, the times are going down, and we're getting a time scale speed up on a couple of animations there. That's what we want to see. We want to see the chain times going from, down by fractions of a second. It's going to help us transition between different attacks faster, and therefore it's going to make the weapon more responsive. That's a big problem the Ogryn has, is that his weapons all feel like you're using the Thunder Maul or Thunder Hammer, and like you're getting stuck in animations because he's big, he's bulky, he's supposed to swing slow, and that just makes him feel like you are playing stuck in wet concrete. So I like this idea that we're making these weapons a little bit more snappy, even if it's only in a very, very metered way. The Brute Brainer Mark V, I think most people understand that this is probably like the best model that he has, but they're making the weapon special animation, like pulling out that heavy special, even faster and snappier by like almost a half of a second. So very, very nice there. We're going to be able to pull out that stuff even faster. Ripper guns. These things have been in a interesting, and when I say interesting, I mean bad state for a while now. The problem is that they have no reason to exist when the kickback does, right? The kickback has this amazing thing called insane damage and a minimum pellet count. And they talk about minimum pellet count here. It's a thing that has kind of fucked the Ripper guns for a while. The minimum pellet count for these things is kind of low, and that means that when you shoot an enemy and hit them with just one pellet, it'll count as if it hit them with 3 instead. When you shoot the kickback, because it has such high base damage and such high minimum pellet count, when you hit an enemy with 1 pellet, they die. Now, that means that you can spread that thing across a horde of enemies and watch them all fall down, as every enemy that gets hit with a single pellet acts as if they took like 5. The same does not apply for the Ripper guns because it's acting as if they only took like 2 and the damage is much lower. So they need to compensate for that. They need to buff the pellet count. They need to buff lots and lots of stuff about it. And yeah, people weren't using the braced action because there's really no reason to do it. They were just hip firing like 1 or 2 shots. It was good enough. And they really do want players, it seems, to use the bayonet attack and actually aim with these things. Remains to be seen if they can get us to do that. They are increasing the ammo by 20 from 148 to 168. That's like an extra mag, so we'll take that. They're making the can opener, the special attack, do 50% more damage from 200 to 300. That's not bad. From 25 to 30 impact, that's quite a bit of stagger, and it's going to get a 1.2 finesse multiplier. So we're entering into the like reasonable realm of finesse multiplier here. We're like half of a dueling sword in terms of finesse multiplier. That could be kind of good. Like that could actually kill some stuff for once. The rest of this is just saying how they're increasing the number of pellets, the minimum pellets. So these, when you're spraying this into hordes, the hordes are going to die easier. And I think that's the most main focus of this weapon, was just to spray into hordes, right? I don't think anyone's using this to take out like solitary big targets. Okay, heavy clubs, heavy clubs. This is the last one, guys. Congratulations on making it there. Heavy clubs are a particular favorite of mine, or at least they used to be back when I started playing this game and I picked up Ogryn as my second class after Zealot, and I fell in love with the heavy club, the Mark I, because it was so fun to beat enemies and they had such a good stagger. They'd go down to the ground and you'd hit them again and they'd have so many bleeds on them and they'd die. And it was pretty cool. And then I found out about about the shield, the slab shield, and I literally never looked back because that thing has a way better attack pattern and it can distribute those bleeds to like millions and millions of enemies. The heavy clubs need some help to compete against things like the slab shield and the pickaxes, and unfortunately I don't think they're really getting that here. Now they might be good, they didn't actually list any stats for it, but they might be good against the captain conversion fields, so maybe we can use this to beat some captains down, but I didn't see any actual information about it down here. What I did see down here is that they patched out something that was actually kind of funny about these clubs, is that the second attack, I think it's on the Mark 1, if you go in and heavy attack once, and that second heavy attack is a sweep from left to right, right? You like cock it behind your head. That one does triple damage to unyielding. So what you could do is you could light attack 1, heavy attack 2 into bosses and do like 900 damage. And so they're taking that down because for some reason someone accidentally made Ogryn good for a patch, and so they have to nerf that. They are increasing the damage for that attack by 40, you know, by like 10% to compensate. But yeah, they nerfed our boy's ability to just dunk bosses for 900 damage every 2 attacks. Oh well. We're gaining lots of buffs though to all the other attacks. The light strike down, you know, the little bop, the small bop, is getting a 70 damage boost from 300 to 370, and it's getting a little bit more finesse multiplier from 0.25 to 0.35. Now, here's where I'm going to start to have the same issues I was having yesterday when I was talking about how Fat Shark pulled punches with this update. This man is ailing out here, right? This weapon is already not viable compared to the other weapons you have. Why are we pulling punches? Why are we not just giving him 0.55 or 0.75 or whatever? It's a club, okay? A club is a head smashing implement. Think back on our rich tapestry of ancestry that people have had since the dawn of time. You walked over to your neighbor's cave and you smashed him across the head with your big club and you took his wife, right? That is what clubs are for. That's what they've always been for. Why are we not incentivizing Ogryns to aim for the heads with the clubs? They're basically walking cavemen. They should be clubbing these dudes in the head. Thankfully, we do get a little bit of finesse boost here, and for the heavy strike down specifically, it's going from 400 max damage to 500, which is a big boost, 25%. That's nothing to shake a stick at. But yeah, so overall, these attacks are going to do a lot more damage, but it remains to be seen if it's anywhere near enough to compete with the superior like weapon move set that some of these other weapons have, like the pickaxe that can just swing and do 1200 damage to everything in a horizontal line, or the shield just bashing repeatedly in people's faces. The slap, the slap is getting a damage boost. It's going from 10 damage to 90, and it's actually got some decent impact. I don't know why they're revisiting these specials so much. No one uses them. I don't think anyone's gonna use the slap, but hey, whatever. Now, here's where I start to get kind of mad about this, is the specific stuff about these weapons. It wasn't good enough. They couldn't just buff them, I guess, for some reason. What they did is they went in here and they said, okay, well, these weapons are like, they can be sped up for like certain attacks, but they have to be slowed down for others. And they also made it so that you can't snappily block. So before these weapons, what people were doing is they were heavy attacking, and then as soon as the heavy attack finished, they would block, cancel, and they would heavy attack again. And that's how you could actually get some considerable damage out of them. And so they patched that, basically. They said that Heavy Chain 2, the block had a 0 timing before. You could literally do it instantly. Now it's going to pause you a half a second if you want to do that and go back to 1. So yeah, you're just going to chain normally now instead of block canceling, which is whatever, I guess. But I feel like we don't need nerfs or adjustments at this point. I would like to see this be only buffs, because this is our worst class. And the same thing applies all the way down, is we've got they're removing that snappiness where you're able to block cancel. They're adding some small delays to keep people like actually using the mechanics rather than block canceling, which I understand, right? But it feels bad that it couldn't just be all overwhelming, joyous, you know, glorious buffs that are going to make this weapon like just absolutely destroy enemies. And that's where I want to end it, because that's all there is to say about Ogryn weapons in the patch today. I really hope that there's more coming. You know, there's a lot more Ogryn weapons in this. There's only like 13 Ogryn weapons total. It surprises me that they couldn't do anything about the power maul, and instead that they kind of gave these sort of mid sort of buffs to everything else. I think that they are designing this around making a balanced class when no one else is balanced, and they have to remember that they are competing with classes that have access to daggers and dueling swords, and now you're giving a guy like 10 more damage on his headshots. Thank God they're making it so you actually should be headshotting with Ogryn, though. I think that'll be very nice to incentivize that playstyle. I'm eager to see how this shakes out, because a lot of this stuff is just numbers, and there's really no way of saying whether or not it'll add up to anything when you can't actually parse what these multipliers end up being on paper. So time will tell on this, but hopefully this gives you something to look forward to if you're a Cleaver, Club, Ripper Gun, or Grenadier Gauntlet user. I'm actually kind of excited about the Grenadier Gauntlet. That might be fun to try out for a little bit. Anyway, guys, have a good one. Mr. E out, and I'll see you next time. Bye.